I'm 78 years old now, and I've learned that silence follows you into old age the same way habits do. It sits beside you in the morning. It waits for you at night. And sometimes it's the only thing that still feels familiar when everything else is thinned out or gone away. People always thought I was quiet because I didn't have much to say. That wasn't it. I had plenty to say. I just learned early on that saying less kept me safer. It kept me employed. It kept me from being corrected, laughed at, or misunderstood. Over time, it stopped being a strategy and became a way of moving through the world. I live alone now. My wife died 6 years ago. No children. A small apartment that stays clean because there's no one here to mess it up. Some days go by without my voice being used at all. I don't mind most days. But when you get to my age, you start noticing patterns. You start seeing how certain choices echoed longer than you ever expected. When you're young, quietness looks like restraint. When you're old, it can look like absence. I wasn't always this way. In my 20s, I talked more. I argued. I explained myself. I tried to be understood. Somewhere along the line, I noticed that the loudest people were rarely the ones listening. They filled rooms but missed details. They won arguments but lost people. I didn't want that. I wanted steadiness. I wanted to observe before stepping in. So I learned to listen. Listening taught me things most people rushed past. You hear contradictions when people talk long enough. You notice what they avoid. You notice what they repeat. Silence gives other people the space to reveal themselves, often without meaning to. That was useful in my work. I spent 40 years in operations management. Meetings were full of talkers. Promotions often went to the ones who spoke confidently, not necessarily accurately. I learned to wait, to speak only when it mattered. When I did, people listened because I hadn't worn out their attention. What I didn't realize was that restraint has a cost. I assumed there would always be another meeting, another dinner, another weekend to explain myself more fully. I thought clarity could be postponed. I thought relationships ran on understanding by default, not maintenance. In my 30s, my wife used to ask what I was thinking. I'd say, nothing important. It wasn't true. I was thinking about money, about whether we'd made the right choices, about whether I was becoming someone she would grow tired of. But saying those things felt heavy. I didn't want to burden her. I told myself love didn't need constant explanation. She stopped asking after a while. That's something quiet people know but don't like to admit. Silence can be mistaken for depth at first. Later, it can be mistaken for distance. And once that shift happens, it's hard to reverse. I watched friendships fade not because of arguments, but because of gaps. Missed calls. Unreturned invitations. Long pauses that never got filled back in. People assumed I was fine on my own. I rarely corrected them. I was fine. I just wasn't included anymore. At work, my quietness was rewarded. At home, it slowly hollowed things out. Another thing you learn when you talk less is that most conversations aren't really conversations. They are performances. People wait for their turn to speak. They prepare replies instead of hearing what's being said. Staying quiet lets you see that. It also makes you realize how rarely people ask questions they actually want answered. That made me patient. It also made me lonely. There were moments I should have interrupted. Moments I should have said, "That's not what I meant," or "That hurt," or "I need you to understand this part." Instead, I nodded. I told myself it wasn't the right time, that there would be a better moment later. Later is a dangerous word. It feels generous. It feels flexible. It lies. The slow cost of silence isn't dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up in small ways. A wife who starts sharing her worries with someone else because they respond faster. A colleague who gets credit for an idea you quietly refined. A sibling who stops calling because you never seem to need anything. I told myself I preferred it that way. Less noise. Less conflict. Less explaining. What I was really doing was choosing comfort over connection. When my wife got sick, everything sped up. Illness doesn't wait for you to find the right words. It demands them. Hospital rooms are quiet places filled with things that should have been said years earlier. I sat beside her bed holding her hand, thinking of all the conversations we never finished because I assumed time was on our side. She asked me once late at night if I was scared. I said no. I didn't want to frighten her. The truth was I was terrified. Not just of losing her, but of realizing how much of myself I had kept hidden, even from the person closest to me. After she died, people told me I was strong. Quiet men are often called strong because they don't cry in public. What they don't see is that silence can numb you to your own feelings if you rely on it too long. Grief doesn't need words to exist, but it needs them to move. Another thing people who talk less usually know is that being observant doesn't make you wise automatically. It just gives you information. What you do with it matters. I stored too much inside. I believed understanding was enough. It isn't. Understanding without expression just becomes weight. I look back now and see how often I chose to stay silent to avoid discomfort. I thought I was being considerate. Sometimes I was just being afraid. Afraid of being wrong. Afraid of being dismissed. Afraid of needing something in return. Silence can look like humility. Sometimes it's just self-protection wearing a nicer coat. There was a turning point after my wife passed. A small one. Not dramatic. I ran into an old friend at the grocery store. We hadn't spoken in years. He told me he always thought I didn't like him much. I laughed, surprised. He said I never let anyone know where they stood with me. He didn't say it angrily. Just matter of fact. That stayed with me longer than it should have. Not because he was wrong, but because he was right in a way I hadn't intended. What can't be fixed now are the assumptions people made because I didn't correct them. The chances to say, "You mattered to me," out loud. The moments when presence would have meant more than composure. I don't regret being thoughtful. I don't regret listening. I regret believing that silence was neutral. It isn't. It shapes how people remember you. It shapes how close they feel. It shapes what gets carried forward after you're gone. If you're listening to this and you're someone who talks less, you probably already know these things in pieces. You know that silence gives you leverage. That it lets you see through nonsense. That it protects your energy. You also know how easy it is to let days stack up without speaking your inner life out loud. I'm not here to tell you to become louder. That wouldn't suit you anyway. I'm just saying this. Some things don't survive being kept inside forever. Not love. Not fear. Not gratitude. At my age, the quiet is deeper. It's no longer a choice most days. It's just the room I live in. I make my coffee. I sit by the window. I watch people pass with their phones to their ears, filling the air with words. I don't envy them. But I do wonder which of them assumes there will always be time. I assumed that once. If this meant something to you, hold on to it gently. Say what needs saying while the room is still full.